All right. So everybody, thank you and welcome to Fortify Your Business breakout session. We've got a great panel on today, and they're going to be walking you through a lot of what things that I need to learn more about, which is insurance and mitigating risk. I'm going to make sure that Toby here is unmuted. There we go. Almost. Toby, you want to unmute?
There, I'll try it
There
from
we
my.
go.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you now. So, everybody, this is Toby Frisk with Value First. They're one of our major sponsors for Fortify, and we're super happy to have you on today. And hopefully, you can wrangle some of those questions in the middle or towards the end as well. We do know that James has a bit of a glitch going on his video right now, but Ed does. We're hoping that goes away when the presentation is up. We definitely don't want Ed to go away, so we're good. All right, so we're going to get going. Take it away, Toby.
You got. Thanks, Sandra, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Fortify Your Business, Strategies for Long and Short-Term Survival. Good morning, I'm Toby Frisk, and I'm thrilled to be here today as the moderator for this session. I'm the Associate Vice President of Agribusiness with First West Credit Union, which is a division of all of our brands, which I'll get to in just a minute. We're actually really pleased to sponsor today's event and Fortify. We really believe in the industry, so thrilled to be here. We work with all types of agribusiness, including the beverage sector, to provide financial solutions and advice to meet our business members' goals. We have an extensive branch network right across BC under the brands of Island Savings, Envision Financial, and of course, Valley First. Just before we get started here, everyone, I want to just touch on some housekeeping. As we experience our way through these virtual uncharted waters, I call them. This is our breakout session will be about an hour today, and there will be time at the end for questions. Feel free to write any questions you have in the chat window. The other thing that's been talked about as a best practice is to take a screenshot with your phone. If there's something of importance or of value there for yourself, it's a great way to keep those available for yourself for future reference. Also, there will be links to the handouts in the chat box. Sandra's going to put those up here momentarily. And we'll do our very best here to make this as valuable as possible. It's now my pleasure to introduce our guests for this session. Ed Olson from Myers Norris Penny. Edward Olson, CPA, CA, is a regional leader, enterprise risk services with MNP in Kelowna. Drawing on more than 2 decades of Canadian and international experience in public practice and industry, Ed delivers practical, meaningful business advice on strategy, risk, and operations to private and public sector clients throughout the Okanagan. Ed works closely with governments and organizations in a wide range of industries, including financial services, utilities, aviation, and education. He advises his clients on everything from internal audit and risk management to corporate governance, process efficiency, and performance improvement. Our second speaker today is James Grant with Signature Risk. Mr. Grant is president and CEO of Signature Risk Partners Incorporated, which he co-founded in 2006. Today, Signature is the largest insurer of golf courses, wineries, craft breweries, and distilleries in Canada, working with over 1,400 independent insurance brokers across the country. Prior to founding Signature Risk, James was vice president at Telvest Fund Management Incorporated, a $5 billion asset management company. Telvest was part of Tal Global Asset Management, one of Canada's largest investment managers with more than $60 billion under management. Tal and its subsidiaries were fully acquired by CIBC and renamed CIBC Asset Management in January of 2006. Prior to joining Telvest, James was a member of the team that launched Altamira International Bank in the Barbados. Mr. Grant was involved in all aspects of offshore banking with a particular focus on the development of an international distribution network through lawyers and leading accountants throughout the Caribbean. Mr. Grant has over 25 years of financial and asset management experience. Welcome, gentlemen. I believe Ed will start us off.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to jump in and share my screen and make sure the presentation comes up. I trust you can see it. Okay, I got the thumbs up. Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate that. It's a really good opportunity to be here today, and thank you. I've called Kelowna home since 2005, and Jim, when I hear that you are involved with Barbados, I have clients in the Caribbean and Central America, and last week I was on with one of them, and they were so kind as to turn their GoPro cam or their webcam around so I could see the palm trees still moving in the background. And I said, well, it looks exactly like the Okanagan right now. So I appreciate that you have a link to that environment and that warmth. But it's a good conversation to have today around business resilience. And I've got a lot of history in this, and MMP has a lot of history in this. But one of the first things I wanted to bring clarity to is that you commonly hear there's almost a trade-off between business resilience and business continuity, and really understanding the difference between both will help you interpret some of the slide content that I'm going to give you today. And if you could think of business continuity, that's knowing what could happen. So you are preparing yourself for those events that can cause disruption to your business. And in fact, we are living through that with the pandemic. It is an event that is causing a change to how we do business. Knowing what could happen, this is where, from a risk perspective, we deal with clients around, was this on your risk radar? Can you look at it? Did you even perceive it having an impact to you? But that's the idea of business continuity. Business resiliency really comes back to responding to really what is happening. So there's an evolution side to the resiliency, and the continuity as a response to an event. And when you put them both together, this is how we encapsulate the protection of your core value. What's the mindset to continually mature and improve? And what's the mindset to actually respond to an event if that event was to occur? So if I jump into it, you're saying, okay, Ed, but events occur, why do we care? And ultimately, the end goal is you exist as a business because there is a value proposition. Getting agreement and understanding around value is not as easy as you think it would be. In fact, it was about 10 years ago, I was working with an animal product wholesaler where I sat down with their executive and board and I said, why do you exist? And it took us 2 days to come to an agreement around why do we exist, what's our value proposition, and what are we offering to retailers and customers, and what's our relationship with those who we are wholesaling for. This is not uncommon because 2 years ago, I was working with a private boys school, and they too, when I sat with their headmaster and leadership team, both the administrative and academia, why do you exist? It was not an easily tangible item that everybody could get calibrated on. So here's the first challenge I'm going to give to you, which is in this slide. Identify your value, the reason you exist. Once you know what it is, there's two components to value. One is the protecting that value, and the other side is generating more of that value. And wrapped around all of it is the activities, those things that you do to carry out the protection and the generation of your value. So if I could, one of the things I would immediately say is, for everybody who's participating at the present, how would you map your business? How would you tell me, if I gave you a whiteboard and we were in a room together, tell me from cradle to grave, what starts, what do you touch, how do you touch it, how do you generate value, what is that niche of the market of why you exist? And if you could look at it from a winemaking perspective or beer processing, it doesn't matter. Map to me your business and why you exist. That's the starting point, if I could, before we get into details around business resilience and continuity. But taking it a step further than that, remember when I said there's the value creation and there's the value protection and then the activities that really drive what you do? That map that I just showed you is the high level, here's what we do and what we touch. This is the how you do it, how you touch it. And it's really important to know we have human resource, so we have staff. When you know the people that are responsible in your process that you need to rely on, otherwise you can't create beer or wine or any other product or service, the flip side is they're not going to work for free. So how do you ensure continuity of ensuring they're paid? If you were to really start slicing and dicing what your business is, and you can even take some of these high level categories within finance, if cash is king, what are you using to consume cash? What are you using to make cash? How are you dealing with tax and payroll and your accounting records? You really want to know all of these are paramount to continue business as normal. If you're looking at production, you have fermentation. How do I continue the fermentation process without having any issues or disruptions, because then I can't get a product to market? If you know the people you rely on, would you say that everybody is critical for business continuity? Or could you continue your business activities with a core grouping of individuals? But here's what to keep in mind as well. If any one of those individuals was no longer available, couldn't come to work, was disabled somehow and is in a hospital, can you continue your operations? And if you can't, those key individuals are the key persons that you want to identify. And your sourcing really comes down to all of your components and your grapes and your hops, everything that goes into what you do. You need to have clarity as to what do I rely on in order to continue my business. Take these high levels and just ask yourself, how would I answer these questions? Who's responsible? What are the individuals? What is that sourcing that is really critical? When you know this, this is where I'm going to intersperse throughout our presentation key questions for your business. And if I could, one of the things to keep in mind, and there's a takeaway that I know Sandra's posting the link in the comment section too, but there's a takeaway document that says, here's all these questions. Give yourself a scale of 1 to 5. Could you answer right now? Have you identified your business operations? Could you do that high level map? Could you understand those business processes? And could you at least articulate it to me? If you could, give yourself a 5. If you can't, give yourself a 1. But let's take it a step further. If you could give me 100% inventory of everything, could you tell me if everything was disrupted, which would come back online in which level of sequence based on what level of priority, and how did you determine that priority so that you get as quickly back up to speed as you could? Could you tell me that prioritization and who would be on first, second, or third base? Do you know what would be required to prioritize your operations? Like, do you know what's required? Here's an example. I had a client in Vancouver who said, if we had the big earthquake, we know construction companies, there are many of them in the city, and we're just going to call them and they're going to rebuild our building. So we have a temporary location. We're going to operate temporarily for a year, but we're good. Do you understand that in the greater context of the province, there's prioritization around those resources of their focus on hospitals and police stations and fire stations? That's where the priority for the resources and the construction would go. It's not to you as another entity. Do you know that prioritization and access to critical resources? Because if you don't, your period of a window is probably much more in the 3 to 5 year period. How do you account for that? And is everybody aware, dependent upon the size of your organization, are they aware of what these key activities are and their level of prioritization? Because if any disruption was to come, you want to know that everybody's on the same page, focusing on the same issues, getting you back up to speed as quickly as possible. And last but not least, it's great to have it all here, but if it's not written down, even in a high level capacity, you're running the risk that once you are required to recover from any event, it's going to be a hodgepodge approach versus a documented approach saying what you're going to do and in which prioritized level. So what about risks? We talked about mapping your business. We talked about the business processes. It is good to know those issues that are coming at you from all angles, whether it be social issues. You kind of dissect these between internal risk issues, external risk issues. If you had crime or hazardous materials, if you're dealing with a pandemic, what was your response? How are you even learning from today what your response is to a pandemic with how you gain access to your customers? There's the direct sales to customers, which is becoming more of a priority versus using a retail aspect. So when you consider the risks, it's really important to then say, if I know what they are, which you should identify what they are, how do I now respond to them? How do I bring my employees up to speed on, did you know that if you open just one email, that email can have any sort of ransomware or cybersecurity risk? If you open the furry puppies or kittens PowerPoint, what is the exposure to the company? And I know it sounds kind of funny, but we many times overestimate the preparedness of a company and underestimate the risk. And this is a classic example when it comes to cybersecurity. How do you protect yourself from those external hazards that can play on your business today? So those vulnerabilities. And they're natural and man-made. So if you think an impact that came from a pandemic would put us to where we're at today, how many of you would have benefited from saying, if we were disrupted in how we do business, what is our resilience to it? How do we change the way we approach business? Because if you were better suited to understanding it, that is a competitive differentiator to those who haven't and who are scrambling to play catch up when an event actually does occur. Or even something as simple as water and utilities are off. You can't even have your staff at work because from a health and safety perspective, there's no sanitary use of washrooms. You can't have them on premises. These things are really critical to know and to assess and ask the questions on. So here's the next set of questions if you could ask yourself. It really starts coming down to, what do we face internally and what do we face externally? And if I could put a little bit of caution here, it would be this. I know I've had clients, even in the banking sector, who said, Ed, well, we've identified 4,000 risks that we're exposed to. That's not going to be helpful. You want to look at what is pertinent to us today. Would you say hurricane is one of the risks that we'll look externally? Well, if you're one of my clients in the Caribbean, absolutely, we want to look at the impacts of it, but we want to think more practicality-wise. What is happening to us here in the Okanagan? What are the things that we should be concerned about? What have we lived through historically? And if we can make a high-level listing of those internal and external risks, how do we now respond if that event was to occur? What are the things that make us concerned where we'd be disrupted? And if there's a disruption that is going to be beyond what we find acceptable, we have to do something about it. That something about it is building the resiliency and the continuity for when it actually comes. But once you've identified the risks, you now want to say, how likely is it to hit us? I can tell you, when we're considering a pandemic, the likelihood of a pandemic was slim to none for many, many, many entities the world over where I work. And yet, look at where we're at today, that economies are under duress, companies are being shut down, governments are putting restrictions where businesses are having a hard time operating. It is a different world, and knowing the likelihood of this event, even if your likelihood was off, did you have an answer or a solution to get you through these hard times? Things even as simple as, what is our cash flow? How do we manage that cash flow? What are our short-term needs and long-term needs? Do we have a plan? Do we have a line of credit? Where are we at? For Valley First, Toby, it's the questions you want for your membership. Have you asked these questions, and do you have the right facilities in place to help you in the time when you're going to need it? I know we've put here as a number 5 question, do we have insurance to cover risk exposures? Well, that's why we've got Jim for a little bit later on in this presentation. The answer is yes. There's a consideration that needs to be had. And if you don't have that conversation on the go, wait for Jim's presentation upcoming, because I know you're going to find it very valuable. All right, so we've gone from the what do you do as a business for value? How do you carry out those businesses through activities, those business actions for value creation? What are the risks that we face? And now you want to get to the point of asking yourself about critical resources. And at a minimum, these 6 critical resources on screen are what I'm asking every one of you to really think about. How do you address each and understand each, and do you have answers to each? And I'm going to walk you through a high level a few of these. If you're looking at equipment, you walk through your operations and you see those assets which are so mission critical that if they were down, you couldn't do the fermentation process. And if you can't do the fermentation process, you don't have a product to sell. What are those mission critical assets that you know you need to identify? Just make a list of those. Then say, who manufactures this? Where does it come from? Are there more than one vendor who can provide this for me? So if they are backed up, I know I can still get it. And if you can still get it, consider what's the lead time on placing an order and actually having it shipped or delivered to you, and the installation period that would be required. Because when you map all this together, because I work with utilities in the Caribbean, they have essential assets that will take months to deliver from Europe to an island like Grand Cayman. So knowing your maintenance structure, knowing the risk to that asset and what could actually cause it to cease existence, you need to build in the redundancy to know, how do I order it? When do I order it? How long will it be till it gets here, so I know I can continue business as usual? Walk through your facilities and identify those mission critical assets and find out, what's the vendor? Are there more than one? What's the acceptable time frame to get it delivered to me? And then evaluate, could it get to me here when I want it to be delivered, if it was to even go down today? How about employees? We talk about employees in terms of health and safety, which is exactly what we need to be doing during a pandemic. The pandemic identified that risk tolerance and risk appetite for many organizations was defined as, we will do nothing to expose any one of our employees to any type of hazard or risk. And so we will incur costs across the board to protect them in what they do daily for us, as well as how they interact with our customers. So when you consider of internal and external risk factors, how do you protect your employees, because they are a critical asset in order to deliver your product to your final customer? And this includes, just like we inventoried key assets within your process, within your manufacturing, within your fermentation, within your distribution channels, you really want to look at those key persons, those key individuals who, if they weren't there, you couldn't continue operations. Now, in some smaller owner operated, that's you. How do we ensure you are protected so that you and your knowledge and your experience can continue if for some reason you couldn't be operationally at the table in order to continue that from a continuity perspective? So human resources is really quite fundamental. And you'd be surprised how, even though we're in a pandemic and people are saying, how do we protect our people? There's many actions around, well, here's what we need to do to get business done because we need to drive profitability. But you've actually taken profitability over the protection of the individual. These need to go hand in hand, and that needs to be a consideration of all your resiliency strategies today. Cool. How about technology? If you think about technology, do you rely on it? And if you rely on it, what do you rely on? Do you rely on hardware and software? Is there a software program that if you didn't have, you couldn't sell to your customers? But if you were selling to your customers and you had their personal information, there's privacy compliance that comes in. So how do you protect that information and ensure ongoing protection? Remember the example earlier where I said it takes only one email that's opened by one employee to activate one malware, one cybersecurity breach, and you have an issue on your hands. How do you look at the information that you hold, that you need to do your business, and how do you protect it? And if it was all gone and that information wasn't available, did you have a backup of it? Where is it so you can easily access it and get back up to speed if you had a disruption to your technology infrastructure? So very much like looking at assets and people, take a look at the technology to start walking through what is it that we rely on, and if it's customer interfaces, and if it's point of sale transactions, if it's our electronic fund transfers and relying on our banking relationships, what is it? And know if there's a disruption, what do you do? And it might sound silly, but even something as simple as an electronic fund transfer, I had a client in Vancouver who said, if we ever had a disruption, we'll be able to continue paying our employees. But here was the issue with paying employees. They still did it by manual check. So if you didn't have access to manual checks, you couldn't write them and distribute them to your employees. How do you pay for them? That question had everybody in the room looking at each other with, well, why aren't we doing electronic fund transfers, or a way to do this so that we don't have to be physically together for me to hand you payment? We can ensure you are paid and there's continuity in that level of payment to you and services back to us. As simple as just a manual check they weren't even thinking about. How about your key customers or suppliers or vendors? Is there ever a point where you know there's a single point of failure? Back to our equipment example, if there's one piece of equipment that you know you rely on, and if you didn't have that piece of equipment, you would be down, not generating any new product, not able to sell anything more other than what's already in inventory for you to be able to sell. If you have a single point of failure, you need to know where that's at. And if you have a particular grouping, high grouping of customers, to know who they are, where they are, and how do you ensure product still gets to them in a new normal like pandemic is forcing us to operate in, that's where you want to focus. What's the cluster of my customers? How do I access them? If that access changes, is there a resilient strategy I have to make a new path for accessing and getting my products to them? If we have suppliers, it can be something as simple as hops. If you don't have access to hops for any particular reason, what's your backup for that? If you don't have access to grapes because there's a disruption to grapes, whether it be driven by climate or it's driven by accidents or anything else that occurs, what do? That's where I'm looking for. Where are those key areas of reliance that you are putting in your environment on these three key stakeholders of customers, suppliers, and vendors? Identify them, look whether or not they are a single point of failure, because if you only have one vendor, it's a single point of failure, and then ask, if it is, how do I build a mitigation strategy around if they did fail? Maybe I need to start calling to understand who else do I go to? And if there's nobody else to go to, how do I work with that vendor or supplier to know what is their business resiliency? Because this whole idea of continuity and resiliency is basically running both up and down either side of the I guess you could call it the product supply chain. Everything you do should help the next individual, and their working with you should help you to be more resilient. So how do you bring that discussion up in existing contracts? What's the discussion you have when you're renewing contracts? Keep those things in mind. So here's some high-level questions regarding your critical resources that you really should ask. And take this as a high-level, call it a quiz, call it a test, or call it a voyage of discovery. It's really good to answer these truthfully to know how mature are you around business resiliency and continuity. So which employees are critical? What are those ones that are required for the business activities that you know you need to continue? And are you solely reliant on one location to produce? Or do you have reciprocal agreements with other locations where you can pick up and continue operations somewhere else? If you don't, maybe you should consider it if the risk is significant enough to you. And how about inventory? Of your turnover rate right now, both from a raw material as well as your final product, how long could you continue to last at current levels for products and sales before you had nothing left? That's the lead time you want to work with to ensure that any disruptions in your production process you can have resolved and not disrupt your final sales to your customers. Where are you most heavily reliant on technology? Ask yourself that across all aspects of internal administration and payroll and accounts receivable and accounts payable, but your interactions with vendors, suppliers, and customers, do you rely on it? And if you do, if it was disrupted, how do you ensure a minimization of the disruption time? And if you look at your vendors and suppliers, mission critical mandates, if you haven't had a discussion with them around how do you continue servicing me when there's a disruption in the environment or community around us, have that discussion sooner than later. I can tell you across all that you're doing today, I would say you'd be surprised that there are many things that you already do have in place that you are already doing. And you might find maybe it's 50% of your critical businesses, your business processes, you already are doing, you have some strategy in place for it. But maybe you've only documented a quarter of those. Start where you're at today, but the important part is start. This isn't something that from a business resilience perspective, you can't risk not starting. Just start with the questions we provided in this PowerPoint, the slide deck, and say, am I ready? And if I'm not, start answering the questions and build your level of process understanding, build your level of documentation, and start working towards getting everybody on the same page. That message of just start, I actually can't emphasize it enough. This isn't we have to make it look perfect in the beginning, otherwise we don't want to start. Start rough. You're going to go through a few iterations, get help from a third party, get some advice from guidance from MMP or from an insurance perspective. It starts with asking the questions, providing an answer, looking at where you're weak, and prioritize working on where can we do some continual improvement. This is never something that you're ever done with. If you looked at pandemic 10 years ago, it wasn't making it on the corporate risk radar of any of my clients in the US and Canada. Guess where it's at today? It's number one. But you can't do everything. So you do want to reduce those risk exposures, those things that are outside of your control. You want to know you've done everything you can, but for what's outside of your control is where insurance really plays a significant part. You want to reduce the financial impacts. You want to be able to have an answer to you as a shareholder personally or shareholders you work with that you've covered for any risk exposure from an operational perspective and financial perspective. And answering these questions around risk to ensure adequate coverage is why we have the esteemed people like Jim Grant, who's now going to take control of this PowerPoint presentation and talk to us about what we should consider from an insurance perspective. Jim, over to you.
So before Jim gets started, if we could just, Ed, are you still doing the slideshow?
No, Jim's going to take it and he's going to run slideshow from his computer now.
Great. Okay, thanks.
And Jim, you're still on mute.
Hey, can you hear me? Thanks, Ed. Did Ed just say there's an earthquake coming? I thought I heard that. 2020, man. Look, I know you're all zoomed out. I want to say thank you to everybody for participating. Particularly thanks to Valley First, to MNP, and of course to Fortify for allowing me this opportunity to talk to you a little bit. Insurance, I understand it's about as much fun as putting a roof on your house until it starts raining. So I'm going to just take 10 minutes here, run you through a bunch of slides. I've got about 8 of them, and then hopefully we can get to some questions. So here's the agenda. Who are we? What's the state of the insurance market in Canada? where do claims happen, particularly in the wine and the grape and beer industry. COVID, what are we seeing around this whole COVID thing and the response to COVID from our partners? Quickly touch on how to work with your insurance broker, and that'll be it for me. Signature was formed in 2006. We launched with Signature Golf, program designed exclusively for the golf industry. And, again, it goes back to what Ed was saying about understanding who you are and what you are. For us, we saw an opportunity in the commercial insurance marketplace, because the needs of golf courses at the time were not being addressed. The Intacs and the Aviva of the worlds were just simply putting golf on the cover page of a generic commercial policy and not dealing with things like tees and greens and mobile equipment and golf cart fleets and clubhouses and host liquor and all of that important stuff. So that's where we started, and then it quickly grew into a program for wineries, followed right on the heels by a program for the craft and distillery marketplace in Canada. Today, we're almost at 1,500 insurance brokers. So, we recognize that your relationship with your insurance broker is important, and we would never ask you to end that relationship. We just invite you to suggest our names to them if they haven't raised it to you in the past, and we're happy to work with them. Today, we are the largest insurer of golf courses, wineries, craft breweries, and distilleries in Canada. What's happening in the insurance landscape right now? It's kind of turning into a bit of a perfect storm. The market was hardening before COVID hit, meaning that insurance rates were starting to go up, and that it was getting harder and harder to find capacity meaning insurers who were willing to accept your risk. And I don't think many people think about it, but if you're a winery or a craft brewery who own a tasting facility and you've got production equipment, et cetera, a typical winery or brewery, I guess, you may have insurance values that, if you put everything together on a piece of paper, total $5, $6, $7, $10 million. And it's important to realize that when you sign that insurance contract, your insurer is promising that if your entire facility gets sucked into a giant hole when that earthquake that Ed was talking about comes, that insurer is on the hook for $10 million. And in exchange, they've probably only charged you $15,000 or $16,000. So it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that as insurers kind of regroup and decide where they want to be 10 years from now, that some of them have decided that these specialty fringe areas are not a place where they can afford to commit their capacity to. So both those things were sort of happening, and they were driven by external factors, some flooding in Houston, Texas. There was some Caribbean windstorm stuff. There were events all over Europe that all had contributed. And then blammo, we get hit with COVID globally, and more specifically here in Canada. Don't get me started about that, but here's where we are. So the domestic insurers, the Intacs, the Avivas of the world, they've been inundated with requests from their home and auto customers, people asking for discounts, trying to figure out what coverage they have. They've been completely overwhelmed by that. And then, of course, all the restaurant owners and operators, and there are others, the dentists, doctors, have been pursuing a lot of legal action against insurers who said, hey, you never had coverage for a pandemic. That wasn't there, and we're not going to support your claim. Those are now getting challenged in court. So some insurers have exited the Canadian landscape completely. There are some who we think are probably still on the fence of trying to decide whether or not they stay or go. Overall, we're seeing increases in renewals of between 10 and 20 or 200%, excuse me. Nobody has been immune to this. It doesn't matter if you're a dentist, a doctor, a beer maker, or a winery or golf course. The rates are just going up across the board. Our own insurance, E&O insurance, was up. I just did the renewal. We were up 45%. We haven't made a claim ever. So it's happening everywhere. And I think you really want to make sure that you are up to date with what you're buying insurance for, making sure you got coverage on all of your equipment and your specialized stuff that you own. You also want to think about your renewal date. Every year we struggle with wineries in particular who have an insurance renewal date in the summer, and which is exactly when those wildfires seem to always spark up out there. And as you can imagine, if you're an insurer looking at a new risk and there are wildfires burning around it, you're probably not going to be excited about welcoming them into the family. So, for those of you who have renewal dates in the summer, I would strongly, strongly encourage you to consider moving those. There's, you know, you'll probably get a better rate and get more opportunities to see more terms from more insurers if you were renewing in January, February, March. So something to think about for all of you. Where do claims happen in your space? Well, what we have seen historically, it's kind of these 5 major areas. Contamination, you know, the turbo yeasts, which may speed up the fermentation process, can get awfully sticky in all that tubing. And you probably all have heard stories if you haven't had experience with it. So, you know, cleaning the equipment properly, spoilage. It doesn't take much to spoil a tank. You know, we had a claim a few years ago in Niagara, thousands of liters of wine being stored outside, and somebody hopped the fence, pried the lid off the tank, and stuck their hand in there, presumably thinking they were getting some free wine. Of course, it wasn't ready to drink, and that person spoiled the entire tank. So things like that are common. Leakage. Again, you know, we see that from disgruntled employees more often than not, surprisingly, but also accidentally. Forklifts, you've probably all heard stories about those as well. They can be dangerous tools. On the product recall sign, of course, a consumer complaint can lead to that recall. Bad label information, that happens quite frequently. Or a contract brewer, any of you who are working with a contract brewer, if they make a mistake, the recall's on you and on your brand. And then finally, you know, the slip and falls. And slip and falls just continue to grow in Ontario and BC. I mean, it's virtually impossible to listen to the radio for more than 5 minutes or even drive down the street without seeing a billboard or hearing an ad from a personal injury law firm, you know, telling you how they can get you thousands of dollars if you know, had an accident while on somebody else's property. So those are not going away. And then, of course, we add into it today's COVID world, and you cannot be too careful. Look, I don't know how you prove where anyone contracted COVID. I don't think you can do it, but it doesn't change the fact that you need to protect yourself as much as you can and remove any shadow of a doubt. We have been and do support a waiver program for all of our insurers. It's an online service, and you know, your guests can click it on their phone and agree to it. It works for ski hills. It works for trampoline parks. It works for tennis and badminton, you know, and squash clubs. There's no reason why it doesn't also work for us in our industries. And so we have been promoting, and in fact, we offer that to our insureds for no charge. I think you probably will all agree that touchless and home delivery is here to stay. And probably the, you know, the biggest challenge that a lot of you are going to have is finding the delivery, because that capacity is drying up really quickly. But there's no doubt in our minds that this sort of structural change in the business is here to stay. And then I wanted to talk about, you know, if you're considering a pivot in operations, and we saw this firsthand when the outbreak first struck here in Canada, March, April, a number of our distillery customers pivoted into hand sanitizer. And of course, we applaud them for that. And it was a really smart and clever move for them at the time. It's now turned out to be an absolutely huge moneymaker for those that did pivot. We work with distilleries whose business plans, you know, they were hoping to sell $1 million worth of product this year, who have gone through $5, $6, $7 million in hand sanitizer sales. And again, I don't think that's slowing down. But what's important to note is that that is a material change in your operations. You know, you're no longer making alcohol for consumption and distribution through you know, the LCBO or the SAQ or BC Wines. And it also is minorly government monitored. So you need to talk to your insurer, whoever it is, and make sure that they endorse this new activity to your existing policy. Don't just do it and think that you can get back to your insurance broker later and hopefully have it added. If there's going to be an issue, you need to address it before you get into the business. If you haven't already, please do immediately. They should be supportive. We certainly are. But you got to make sure you get approval to do that. And then, of course, coming down the pipe is this cannabis infused craze, I'll call it. I'm not sure if the technology's been figured out. We hear a lot about it. We hear a lot about the challenges. The CBD sticks to the side of the can and it doesn't dilute properly in the beer. And, there's all these issues. I'm not sure where we're at on the wine side. The craft brewers seem to be in front of this, but I have no doubt that there will be some sort of infused wines coming down the pipe. And again, you need to get that endorsed and approved by your current insurer before you just jump in. Going over a slide. Did I skip one? No, here we are, working with your broker. Look, we work with a lot of them, and I will be very candid with you. Not all of them are great. And to be fair to them, most of them, their bread and butter for their business is home and auto insurance. So they really understand how to place home and auto stuff for you guys, for all of us. And they're typically pretty good at doing that. But when it comes to a commercial insurance policy, they have very little experience in general in working with a commercial operation. Sure, they may be able to insure a hair salon or a butcher or a baker, but when we start talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in brewing equipment and all the machinery that goes into operating a winery, trellis and vine, I could go on. They don't know what they're doing. That's okay. And that's why they come to us, because we make sure they're asking all the right questions. Fuel storage tanks is another good one that comes up all the time. So I think you just need to be aware that sure, your broker is a great person and you love hanging out with them, but they're going to need your help, and they're going to need to work with an insurer who understands your industry to make sure that you are properly covered. I would just extend to Ed's comment around business interruption and the cyber threat. We see that in the brewery industry. We've seen a lot of spoofing. We had one recently where a brewer almost sent $275,000 to what they thought was their manufacturer of tanks in Europe, and it turned out to be a scam. They caught it in time, but it's out there and it's happening, and you all are the target. They're not necessarily going to go after an IBM, or an Amazon, who have the most sophisticated technology and firewalls on the planet. They're going to go after small to mid-sized businesses, SMBs, just like you guys, because they're going to hope that you may not have the protocols in place to stop an attack. So beware and take heed to what Ed was talking about. And then finally, I would just say, about a custom package, it's really never been more important. And for a couple of reasons. One, you want to make sure you've got everything covered, and in this challenging environment, that matters. But secondly, there's a whole revolution going on here in your space. And I applaud you all. That what we're seeing in the craft beer industry is just absolutely mind-blowing. And I think the wineries are going to have that same sort of snowboard moment that the golf courses went through as provinces start opening up and international markets start opening up. And so you're going to start, hopefully, to grow your sales outside of Canada. And all of that is going to require working with an insurer who understands how to help you in those endeavors. If any of you are interested on our website, and Sandra may be distributing these, but we did a couple of guides, one for the brewery industry and one for wineries. Those are out there. They're free. We strongly encourage you to have a look at them. Go through them with your broker if you like. But hopefully that'll help kind of identify the major areas that I was referring to. So just to wrap it up, insurance is getting more expensive. It's getting harder to get. I don't think it's going to get any easier or any cheaper in the near future. So you really got to make sure you're staying on top of your risk management and that you're working with the right broker, and that you've dotted your I's and crossed all your T's. Again, a custom program will help you. And then finally, and I can't stress this enough, you got to make sure you get approval from your insurer before you enter a new market or pivot in any way, shape, or form. So that's it from me. Thank you all. Sandra?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
We're going to have, we haven't seen questions come in yet, but Toby, I'm sure you can get that started.
Well, I do have a couple questions, or at least one to get us started. And Jim, it just thanks for some really thought-provoking information. And even in the banking sector, we like to mitigate risk, and we're asking our members and clients as to what they're doing to mitigate risk when it comes to their business. But you made a couple of comments. One was just around the change of a renewal date. That really resonated with me. But how does one go about that? Is that something that's looked upon negatively, or how do we do that?
No, not at all. It's really easy to do. We're just simply doing, you shorten the term. So you'll have a stub in your current policy period, and then we'll cancel and rewrite it today. And away you go for another new 12-month period, but today's your new X date renewal date.
Yeah, right. And most brokers would be very open to that, and
well, the insurers are for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
There's nothing negative associated with it. And in fact, we prefer it. We'd much rather be working with you now, right? When things have quieted down a little bit, and certainly when there's no risk of forest fire going on, than struggling with it through July and August.
That makes perfect sense. And that's a good one for sure. I just wanted to come back to COVID too. I mean, I think that's something that we're all facing in that uncertainty. And, you made mention about waivers. That resonated with me as well, because we see them all over, and in the wine industry and the beverage sector. The idea of waivers, it's not, like, to my knowledge, it's not super common. Is that something that, it would be obviously something that we should be looking at? Is that something that's looked positively from an insurance perspective? The waiver side?
Well, for sure. I mean, it's going to protect you as an operator against a frivolous claim. And, that's the reason that when you go skiing, for example, which I'm sure you're all doing out there, you may be even doing it now, but your waiver is actually printed on your ski ticket, and you need to attach it to your body. Like you can't put a ski ticket on your goggles anymore, because those are transferable. So it's got to be attached on your coat, attached to your body, because you're agreeing to the terms of that waiver.
Right.
And, it's been tested in court time and again. The most recently went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the waivers held up as they should. So it's something that's super easy to do. People expect it these days, I think. And it really shouldn't slow you down, but it's going to save the heartache of a $150,000 frivolous claim when someone sits on their own finger in your tasting room.
Yeah, I don't think
walks into a light post.
I think society is very open to waivers, and I think it's not something that would be an issue to have them sign off on. What about endorsements? You also made the comment, Ed, around or Jim, sorry, you made the comment around endorsements to change or to pivot our operations. For example, distilling hand sanitizer. Is that something that's difficult to do from an insurance perspective? I mean, is it something that's pretty cool and easily done or agreed upon?
Look, our goal is to have our insureds running as a going concern and making as much money as possible, right? So that's our number one goal. And if a pivot to hand sanitizer is something that's going to help you keep the lights on and keep your employees going and maybe add to the bottom line, then of course we support it. And I think, I hope that the response is the same from all insurers, but certainly that's our position.
Oh yeah, good. So you're working with us, in other words, and it makes sense.
Yeah, and it just has to be disclosed in case something goes wrong down the line. We want to make sure that we were aware that's what you were doing, and that you've taken whatever precautions, Health Canada precautions are in place, and you're abiding by those rules. And then we'll protect you and cover you in the event something goes sideways.
just want to go back to the waiver piece just for a moment. There was a question here in the chat, Jim, just to round out, if we had waivers and we had our clients getting off, are we seeing would we by chance have a little bit lower rate on our insurance?
I'll tell you what's coming from us. We're going to mandate waivers, and there's going to be, so an insurance policy is typically broken down into two parts. There's the property side, which is your buildings and all your equipment, and there's a premium charge for that. And then there's the liability side, right? So in case someone slips and falls or whatever, and there's a separate premium for that. In the not too distant future, on the liability pricing side, there are going to be two prices. There's going to be a price for the group that has a waiver program, and then there's going to be a price that's 2x for the group that refuses to have waivers. I mean, it's that meaningful. And it's that important, we think, to the risk management on that slip and fall side. And it's the only way we can combat these personal injury lawyers. So it's absolutely coming.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
You could think of it as the difference between having an alarm system or not, right? You get a credit there of sometimes up to 20% if you have one. If you don't have one, it's a 20% surcharge. So there can be a 40% swing in the premium just on that one item. And the same is going to be true for waivers in the very near future.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, thanks, Jim. I don't see any other questions just yet. So, Ed, thanks for your presentation as well. It really got me thinking as well around the business resilience versus continuity, and really knowing and planning and really starting now in documenting, just really getting focused. And I made a note in my notes here. Just I always thought of it as working on our business instead of in it. So just really having a shift in mindset to really be better and be prepared. And I think we're in these times now that really tell us how important it really is.
And I got to tell you, Toby, this is an honest admission. It's pretty simple, and keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate the process right now. This is a matter of what do we do, and who better to do that than the people who are on this call today. We understand our business. Good. Tell me as an individual, if I knew nothing about it, what is it? And then build out from there and ask yourself, how do we ensure that we are resilient? And wait, if we're pivoting on our product, that change, yes, we have to link to insurance with what Jim was saying, but there's a great strategic benefit to changing course because now we're building value. Back to that value creation I was talking about, all of these link together, which is why it's really a great thing to do altogether.
Yeah, and those are things that we're looking for as well from the lending perspective. How well are we managed? How well is our business managed? Are we able to get up and going? And can we pivot in COVID, or can we plan for the unexpected? I mean, those are all big pieces of management that any lender is looking for. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Excellent.
All right. That was great. Thanks so much, Jim and Ed and Toby. I hope everybody got a lot out of that. And we really appreciate you coming on. I know you're not all in the same time zone, but we appreciate you coming on today.